Welcome, truth seekers, to Paranormal M, where we unravel the mysteries that lurk in the shadows. Subscribe and turn on notifications to be part of our community of curious minds. Let's explore the unknown together. My experience with a haunted house. When I was a kid, we moved to this old house out in the country. The house had a basement and an attic. In the basement, there was pentagrams painted on the walls. I was always creeped out with the basement and remembering seeing glowing eyes in the hole of the ceiling of the basement. One time while in my room, I was doing my homework with my headphones on. I felt a hand hit my hair. I saw my ponytail swing from one side to the other from the corner of my eyes, and then my chair started shaking violently. There was no one in my room, and I couldn't explain how that happened. I was 13 at the time, and it scared the shit out of me. I didn't tell my parents because they're Jehovah's Witnesses. They would freak out and make me pray and read the Bible. Another incident happened while I was at home alone. Both my parents were at work at the time, and I was in the bathroom brushing my hair. That's when I heard my stepdad's voice very clearly say, "Hi, I'm home." I heard the footsteps and his keys rattling and the back door slamming shut. I think my stepdad was home. Came out of the bathroom responding to what I thought was my stepdad. At first, I thought maybe he was hiding from me, so I started looking around the house for him. When I looked out of the window, I saw that the gate was still closed and no cars were parked outside in our driveway, and the back door was still locked. I got freaked out. But I said in a loud voice, "I must be going crazy," thinking that if I ignored it, it wouldn't bother me. I used to see black figures in the corners of my eyes, and when I would turn to look directly at it, it wouldn't be anything there at all. I used to hear a man's voice saying my name in a loud whisper in my ears. I've even heard the same voice saying my name while I was at work before nobody came around me. My sister one time was running in my room late at night scared, wanting to sleep in my bed because she said she saw a ghost. She said the ghost was of a woman wearing a light-colored dress and was just pointing at her in the doorway of her room, and it vanished. Years after we moved from that house, I would have recurring dreams of that house, and it would always be about ghosts and weird stuff. I don't know what that's about, but that house was pretty creepy to live in. The intercom in my room talks to me, but is disconnected. So I'm a college student, an 18-year-old female, and all the residential areas on campus have a different name: Highland, Park, Historic, and North. I chose to live in the Historic District because it was the one with the most greenery. It was close to all of my classes, and my brother stayed in the same dorm when he went to my uni. I lived on floor 3 of 3 at my dorm, and I noticed something really odd shortly after moving in. There's an intercom right on the wall at the foot of my bed. I inquired about it at the front desk, asking if it was hooked to the desk or campus security, anything like that. The desk assistant had no clue what I was talking about and directed me to the most popular RA in the building. I asked him about the intercom, and he told me the story as follows. Back in the day, the rooms had intercoms that went to the basement. Not sure why the basement, but the basements of the historic dorms are closed after somebody unalived themselves in the back in the day. There's also rumors that they connected to a bomb shelter at the campus, but I don't know. I was aware of the bomb shelters. We have staircases that lead down at random spots all over campus. One just outside and to the right of my dorm. You can even hear the pressure release from them about every half hour or so. But this intercom thing spooked me, so I chose to ignore it. My roommate and I had pretty opposite schedules, so we were rarely in the room together. Weird stuff would happen to us, though. I'd be working at my desk and I'd hear a woman go, "Hello?" Who I'd assume was my roommate or friend from down the hall. But I'd turn around and nobody was there. My closet's about 2 feet from the intercom, and sometimes I'd hear the doorknob turn. It's all good stuff in this dorm, everything creaks. My roommate would text me asking if I forgot my keys and was knocking on the door, which obviously I wasn't. There was even a time where we were both in the room and a huge bang hit the door, right next to the intercom. We freaked out and looked through the peephole but saw no one. We slowly opened the door to look down the hall, and because we're in the center and there isn't anywhere to run, but no one would be there. My roommate broke her leg a month into the school year and had to drop out, leaving me on my own. These weird occurrences would happen, so I spent a lot of time in my friend's room, only ever sleeping in mine. Eventually, we migrated to hanging out in my room, but my friends would always comment about how bad the energy was. It seemed to subside after a bit, but there are still some days I walk in and it's absolutely draining in there. There have been instances where my boyfriend and I are about to fall asleep and he'll say, "What do you mean?" And I'll ask confused what he's talking about, and he'll go, "Didn't you just say?" Some weird clicking, almost like a telegraph, started coming from the intercom around October. I asked the RA about it, and he assured me the intercom was disconnected. I started making more friends, meaning I wasn't in more rooms in my building, and the more I spent time elsewhere, the more I realized my room is the only room with an intercom. I have a picture of it, and I'll try to attach it in the comments or something. But even as I write this, I have an uneasy feeling like I shouldn't be saying this. Ready to tell it. My dad died on Halloween. I lost my dad just a couple of weeks ago, and I had all of these. Just 2 weeks before his passing, I visited him, and we had a big family get-together with dinner. My dad and I had a difficult relationship in some ways because he liked to keep pretty isolated. Maybe I didn't visit enough. I'm not sure of which now, but anyway, at this visit, he had gotten a haircut and a shave, and he looked healthier and more presentable than he had in the last 2 years. I sort of just brought a dish I was sure he'd have nothing to do with. He ate with me and said how delicious it was. I put on the Eagles and we sang "Take It Easy." At the end of the night, he let me hug and kiss him goodbye, which he has never done in his life, and I told my dad I was moving to the coast to be near the ocean. He asked if he could come see me when I got there, as he'd never been to the ocean. I promised he could, despite my shock at the idea he would even come, and we spent time dreaming of how wonderful it was going to be when he came. Afterward, my husband said it was the best visit we'd ever had with Dad, and it was. I was really looking forward to seeing him on his birthday, November 2nd, not knowing I wouldn't get the chance to ever see him again, losing him 2 days beforehand. Later in the week, my husband and I went for a walk. He asked why I cared so much to research my family tree. I told him how a couple years back I'd finally done my dad's tree and all the things I learned, including the very interesting story I shared with my husband about how my simple father is actually a talented musician. I literally sang the only song I ever remember him writing as we walked. It was about one of the last prisoners executed at Don Jail, who I'm pretty sure Dad named me after. It's a sad song about the father of the prisoner attending and mourning his son's hanging. My husband got very quiet and noted how unusually deep and somber the conversation had turned. I agreed, but it felt right to talk about it at the time. 1 week later, my daughter said that my dad had tried to call her, but she was unavailable. I don't think he's ever tried to call her before, so I tried to call him back, but his number came up out of service. I have no explanation for how this occurred within 30 minutes of him calling my daughter. I had a bad feeling. I tried to call my mom, who was his ex-wife, but he was still good friends with and lived close by, but no answer. I told myself to let it go and to stop worrying. Early Halloween morning, my husband was up late as usual, working out some papers at a local cafe. I woke up at 12:24 and called him anxious, asked where he was, and when he'd be back. He accused me of behaving strangely and said he was where he always was when, he'd be back soon. I awoke again at 1:50 a.m. after what could be described as a panic. I called him again to discover he was downstairs in our house. I was disoriented and he accused me again of acting very weird. I wrote it off and went to sleep, barely remembering anything of it by the morning, and this has never happened. The following day I had scheduled off work for an appointment, which turned out to be very lucky, because I was still in bed instead of being at my desk 90 minutes away where I normally would have been when my brother called and told me Dad had died the night before. I left quickly with my husband to go to where Dad and my family live. In the car, I started crying. My husband gently asked what I was thinking about, and I said, "When I woke up, I called you last night, and I can already tell you that's when he went." And I was right. We got there and learned Dad died at 12:25 a.m. Halloween morning. My mom divorced my dad over 30 years ago. He never did divorce her and never loved another. He should have died on his apartment floor alone, but she came to visit him that afternoon and insisted on bringing him to the hospital after seeing he was unwell. He was admitted and stabilized after a pretty long arrhythmia. She told him that she loved him and she would let us know he was in the hospital and that she would visit in the morning. That wily old bird passed away just a couple of minutes after the love of his life left his bedside, and I'm certain that was deliberate. For the next several days, Take It Easy played on a continuous loop in my head. Thought I was going insane and I couldn't make it stop. After the funeral, after my eulogy at the end to which I played Take It Easy, it finally did. I spent the days asking for a sign from Dad that he was okay. I now believe this endless repetitive music in my head was his goodbye to me. Still gonna move next to the ocean. Dad, and when I do, I'll promise I'll take you with me. Woman in Black Mystery. I need help identifying an event that I cannot find any information on. 20 years ago, I was sleeping beside my husband and I woke up. As I was turning over, I looked over my husband's shoulder and I saw a woman standing in the bedroom doorway staring at my husband intently with curiosity. She then began moving toward him. She had no idea I was watching her. When she began walking toward him, I got angry and I was going to launch myself over him and tackle her. But she was too far away and I was concerned I would wake my husband up, maybe causing me to hurt him. Instead, I turned over, got out of bed, went around the bed, and by the time I got to the other end of the bed, she was gone and just vanished. This was no common intruder. She was approximately 5 feet tall, very slim, but with a definite female figure, around 100 pounds. She was not clothed, but looked like a solid silhouette, or as if head to toe in a skin-tight black bodysuit. She didn't have hair on her silhouette. Why can I describe her so well? First, she was less than 12 feet from me. Secondly, this was not the first time seeing the paranormal. It's no shock or fear. But although I do not mind paranormal encounters, I don't let them come near my husband. Can anybody give me any hints what she was? She seemed solid. I could not see through her for any details in the hall, and she was darker than the surrounding night. But it might have been moonlight, and we have skylights in the living room downstairs. When she realized I saw her, she stopped, felt surprised. And yeah, I am also empathic. So if someone or something has a strong emotion, I feel it, even animals. I found information on shadow men, but this is a woman, not a shadow, and not sinister. Found information on men in black, but she's not wearing a suit or a shite shirt. Think she meant white. I can find no reference on this at all. Anyone have a similar event? And no, I was not dreaming, I was fully awake. Can someone help me figure out if my doll is haunted? And if so, how to deal with it? I like to go charity shopping a lot. You can find amazing things there for even better prices. And in my most recent shop, I found a really cute doll. I saw it and knew I wanted it as it was so cute. For context, I've always been 50-50 when believing in the supernatural. I've always been fond of the concept, especially in horror-related media. I've also kind of always understood the possibility and how it came to be. I also understood how it's unlikely, too. But since I've got this doll, I've noticed whistling from behind me whenever the doll's been in the same room, and despite being in the back bedroom and not often hearing stuff from the streets. I play it off as someone outside whistling. I have audio processing issues and often have a hard time navigating where sound is coming from. I'm bringing this up now as something else has happened. I was showering, and I usually leave the door slightly open if I'm home alone, as my dogs always find some way to misbehave. And that way I can keep a better eye on them. My dogs started barking uncontrollably, and I thought it was someone outside. I couldn't stop them from barking, and my father was planning on ordering me food, so I ended my shower and checked the door. When I got out, I noticed my dog nervously barking at my bedroom door, where my doll is being kept, until I go to my mother's. I decided to go into my room and check it out. Usually my dogs willingly run into my room and get comfy on my bed or chew what they can find, but they wouldn't. They both stood there barking. I'm well aware that animals are deemed to be a lot more sensitive toward the supernatural and aware of my dog's behavior enough to know that this is unusual. That's why I made this post, looking for advice or answers. If it's somehow haunted, I want to keep it and understand it unless it's an unkind entity. An encounter we'll never forget. I live in Louisiana. It was about 2 years ago in mid-November. Me age 14 at the time, my younger sibling age 12, and my younger cousin age 13. We were all hanging out over the weekend. My mother had hit a tree earlier that week down their driveway. We asked him to show us. It was probably 9:30 p.m. I grabbed my phone and we all walk out the door. We're walking down the hill as he was telling us about how our mother had hit the tree from being intoxicated about a week ago. Our cousin was showing us what tree she hit and the story that she had told them. He pauses and everything appears silent. No crickets, frogs, ambitious, nothing. Our phone batteries drain and our lights turn off. My phone's at 20%. However, it didn't die, it just powered itself off. My sisters, which were at 30%, were now dead, and my cousin didn't have a phone at the time, but he had a flashlight, which the batteries were now dead in. We all look at each other dead in the eyes, only being able to see each other from the moonlight illuminating our faces. We look away into the forest. Then we hear the screeches and something coming at us on all fours. They book it in the dark as I fumble to turn my light on, and so a few moments later I'm running up a hill as I hear heavy panting, occasional screeches as this creature is picking up its speed. They claimed to just hear screeches the whole way that night, but we all made it back unharmed. We were all out of breath and we were all alive, and I'm now 16 and we still wonder and talk about what we encountered that day. Needless to say, we don't go outside after dark anymore. Here's a little background information. My cousins live out in the woods with wolves, coyotes, and about 7 dogs at the time that had roamed the woods around that time, so it wasn't unusual to hear things like this. However, well, this thing I'm assuming was a creature was much larger than a dog, a coyote, or a wolf, and it doesn't explain the silence we heard that night. Or perhaps didn't hear. Something lurking in my neighborhood. This happened last night. It's been taken down thrice and the weird things are still happening. Okay, a female 16, 17 in a couple of weeks, and I need some help. Anybody out there that knows what could have done this? It's 8:30 p.m. in the northern United States, and it's very dark out. I heard a strange noise coming from outside because my window is open. It sounded like a baby crying, but my mom, a 49-year-old female, described it as somebody groaning. But it didn't sound quite right. It was almost like Uncanny Valley, but audio. When I went downstairs to ask who made that noise, my mom and brother were standing outside on the deck, door wide open looking terrified. My brother, a 10-year-old male, went back inside and went outside with my mom to watch my dog. She looked really scared, shaking, leg up, tail between her legs, staring directly across the street. She didn't move for 7 minutes, just staring. After the initial noise, somebody shouted, "Shut up!" And that's when we knew it wasn't just us. Suddenly, a bunch of dogs started barking, but then abruptly stopped after a couple of minutes. Then, as if something was trying to fit in, a dog started barking 3 barks. It sounded like a dog, but also didn't. It sounded very obviously imitated and almost sounded like it was coming from just across the fence, but nothing was there. We all went inside, started locking every door and every window, closing all the blinds. My mom told us she was going to protect us no matter what. My brother's sleeping with my dad tonight. I'm sleeping with my window closed and locked. Can somebody please tell me what they think it could be? I could do some research. I need to know what I'm up against. Thank you for reading, and please don't take this story as a joke or a ruse. This just happened. My family and I are very worried. I have psychosis, and seeing that my family is also scared and hearing everything shows me that I'm not crazy. Baffling Experience when I was 5 or 6 years old. When I was like 5 or 6 years old, my grandparents always picked me up from school and brought me back to their apartment, due to my parents' work schedule. My mom would come pick me up from their apartment after work then. The whole experience began with a nightmare. It could have been my first nightmare in my life, and as I'm always able to control my dreams, and that was the first time I couldn't, and it was scary. In that nightmare, I was lying on an old bed in a very dim room with weird green light. Someone that looked like my grandma but didn't feel like her approached the bed and sat next to me. I couldn't move at all. Then the grandma said, "I can't sleep tonight because the pillows are poisoned." And then I woke up uncomfortable and sweating. The next day, my grandparents picked me up from the school as usual, and I was unusually closer with Grandma, but because of the nightmare, I chose to play with my grandpa in the living room. Grandma watched us play for a while, and then she went into work in the kitchen. The kitchen is at the end of a narrow, long corridor, so I couldn't see her, but I could hear on and off running water in the sink and the changing of pots and plates. After a while, Grandpa said he had to use the bathroom, which is next to the kitchen in the corridor. I don't know, although my grandma wasn't in the living room anymore. I was still afraid to be left there alone, so I begged Grandpa to let me follow him into the bathroom, which of course he refused. Still, I followed him to the bathroom and tried to block him from closing the door by pushing against the door, and one of my feet was on the wall the other side of the corridor for support. My whole body was literally blocking the kitchen entrance, and I could see Grandma washing something in the sink in the corner of my eye. She was actually just 3 steps away from me. After a while of back and forth and the door battling with me, Grandpa got annoyed and kind of shouted, "I don't understand what you're scared of." But Grandma's in the living room. We won't be left alone. I was so baffled at that point, I let go of the door and Grandpa closed it. I was scared of Grandma, who's just steps away from me, so I retreated back to the living room, which she was indeed folding laundry on the couch. Ran into their bedroom and wrapped myself under the duvets until my mom came to pick me up. What confused me is why'd Grandpa say Grandma was in the living room when it was just 2 of us playing there right before he had to use the bathroom. It's a small room, I couldn't possibly ignore another human there. I'll try to include a layout of the apartment later. You probably heard her. A random piece of skull, R, showed up in my house. I'm not sure if this is an actual paranormal incident or somebody playing a super elaborate trick on me. I collect skulls and skull art. Think Dave the Dead type skulls. I left my door open for my best friend to come in and watch the football game while I was gone because he had a gap with work and it was close to my house. He mentioned that I liked the new skull. My dad had bought me one recently, so I just figured that was it. When I walked in, I noticed on my shelf a skull I'd never seen. I said, "Did you get me that?" He said, "I thought you said your dad got it for you." I had never bought that skull. Looked around my house instantly because the door was open. Called everybody who it could possibly be. Everybody swears it's not them, and I'm not friends with the type of people that would prank me like that. So we start to think somebody came in because the door was open. We cleared the house. My desk is turned sideways in my office, so my new skull and my desk are turned sideways. Nothing else is taken. If they wanted to steal from me, they could have taken anything, but I've noticed nothing gone. The next day I put it outside. 2 of my friends confirmed and watched me put it outside because I didn't want it in my house. I then had to drive my friend 2 hours up north, and when I get back, I have my friend come in with me because I'm a little scared, and we get back and it's literally on the top of my shelf. I'm extremely scared now. Called my 2 friends that were with me and they confirmed they didn't put it up there. My desk was also moved again. Had my dad and brother come over. My friend stayed the night. Now I'm trying to figure out what to do. If it's a person, why are they moving the desk to a weird spot? If it's someone, why aren't they stealing? I'm gonna get some cameras today. Maybe more weird things. Why move the desk, and why would a person pull my desk away from the wall, and that alone? I'm trying to be very logical about this, but I have no answers, and I don't want to seem crazy to my friends. An angel cut my tooth in half. A little bit of background. I'm agnostic and pretty skeptical. I don't believe in really anything paranormal, but I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, and the time of this story was during the late 80s, early 90s, mid-satanic panic era. There was a lot of circulated rumors about this or that being demonic, and you had to be careful about what you brought into your house, lest you invite demons into your home, so I guess they're like vampires or bedbugs. Also, lots of urban legend stories, a lot of them involving Smurfs, like Smurf wallpaper stomping newborns to death in their sleep and the like. Important to understand is that Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe in ghosts or aliens or anything else, but rather than discount the stories themselves altogether, they merely blame them on bored, vindictive demons fucking with us, because they've been banished to Earth as their fallen angels. Oh, and interesting side note. Apparently this eviction from heaven only happened in 1914. I'm not sure why God waited so long. Maybe it's like renter's protection and he needed to give them tons of notice and 3 months rent or something, but I digress. So yeah, basically, if there was a Jehovah's Witness Scooby-Doo cartoon, every ending would be the same. Now let's see who's really behind this. And they'd remove the rubber alien mask and the glowing ghost sheet and dinosaur fossil. I knew it, just a regular old demon. Anyway. Around 9 or 10 years old, I start being left home alone. Big family, so it didn't happen much. But when it did, I started noticing things from the corner of my eye, around the edges of darkened corners. Only a couple of times did I notice a discernible shape, and it looked like this stuffed toy somebody in the house had recently gotten. Black-furred, big-nosed, kind of goofy yet terrifying in the right context. I guess think Five Nights at Freddy's style. Sometimes I'd get so freaked out I'd bolt out of the house with barely a jacket or shoes on and sit outside my house in the winter. I can't remember what excuse I gave when my family came home and found me shivering on the stoop, but I didn't tell them the truth. I even started to join my mom on painfully boring errands. Kids nowadays likely fail to understand what hours of errands at a hair salon, dry cleaners, and bank at Joann's Fabrics is without, a cell phone or a Nintendo Switch. At best, we had Tiger handheld games, which were typically less fun than simply staring at your hands. But I endured it all rather than being left alone with the demons. Those games were fun. In retrospect, all of this is easily dismissed. Young mind crammed full of the idea that the world is teeming with demons out to get him. Left alone for the first time in his life, and his mind conjures demons out of the flickering shadows, but it's what comes next I can never wave a hand away quite so easily. I'm about 11-ish, I think, and I lose one of my last baby teeth, maybe my last one. I don't remember, but it's a molar. Jehovah's Witnesses famously don't celebrate anything, but there is actually few things that weren't forbidden. I just don't remember if we did the tooth fairy thing. I mean, I know there was no pretense of a fairy, just my mom taking my tooth and giving me $1, but I know I didn't get $1 for this last one. Maybe it was too late in the game, being the last-ish tooth and being the youngest of 8 kids. The kid tooth market was now incredibly saturated. She probably had a coffee can full. Technically, she might even qualified as an ivory dealer. So I'll go to bed that night. I have an oddly specific memory of putting my tooth on the bedside table on a metal base of my lamp. I wake up sometime during the night, and it's full, deep, silent, scary night. Not my parents are still awake and I can hear them watching MASH in the living room night. It's one of those half-awakes where your dreams are still a vivid reality and you can effortlessly step back into them. I'm instantly aware of a large, bluish, white glowing presence at the end of my bed. It's an angel with its back to me, focused on something else, which is odd and in and of itself, as the only thing in that part of my room of interest was my Dick Tracy action figure. So hopefully he was bringing me the blank figure, because I couldn't find that shit anywhere. I don't remember if I could move, but I didn't. I was scared, but in an oddly detached, non-panicky sort of way. He became aware of me and looked back, and not in a malevolent way, but not kindly either. It was more of a cold, slightly sneering indifference. Then I just fell back asleep, which was obviously odd. Had it been someone innocuous like my mom in my room at 3 a.m., I doubt I'd have drifted back off so quickly. Let alone a potentially fallen angel rooting through my collectibles. I loved those Dick Tracy toys, and I was very paranoid and protective about losing the Tommy guns on those things. It happened to a Jehovah's Witness pal of mine. His mom took all their weapons. He was left with a bunch of squat, Lego grip-handed, suited old men with stupid hats. And who wants to play with that? But I digress again. Then I just awoke in the morning, but didn't immediately remember the previous night's visitor. I woke just like any other morning, sat up, but then paused during my crooked Y stretching as my eyes rested on the molar and was still on the lamp base, but had been expertly cut in half. It was perfectly smooth, like it had been done with a laser. The other half was gone. I didn't immediately suspect my mother, firstly. I doubted she had access to that level of technology, and second, if it was her, then where was my 50 cents? Only then did I recall the previous night's events, and as you can imagine, it shook me up. I mean, there was a spooky paranormal aspect that would scare anybody. But atop all that was the sheer randomness of it. Nothing added up to anything, and it was just an absolute casserole of nonsense. Now, had the demon or angel burnt a cockeyed 666 on my wall and left a steaming cauldron stuffed with Smurf merchandise, then okay, sure, I'd have been terrified. But at least it would have been on brand, and fallen neatly into place with everything else I knew, but what the fuck did he want with half of my tooth? I snatched up my half-tooth, went to find my mother, not really expecting answers, but at least wanting somebody else to acknowledge and share in this fucked-up situation. When I found her, I didn't editorialize or bring up any of the angel business, just handed it over with a, "Hey, look what happened to my tooth when I was asleep." She examined it closely, but far too briefly, and handed it back with something like, "Huh, that's kind of weird. Where's your father? Tell him breakfast is ready." Her lack of astonishment felt suspect. I went looking for my dad with the inner monologue of a TV detective. No, I don't think she did it, but she knows more than she's telling us. I didn't even bring it up to my dad, as my relationship with him was fraught, and it felt unwise to do so. More than likely, I'd have been blamed for it in some way, and I'd be interrogated about my Coca-Cola consumption. So I sat on this information. I think I tried to bring it up casually with my mom again later, but again got nothing, and a week or so later it was missing off my dresser. Thought I maybe knocked it off or something and I'd show up eventually, but it never did. Shortly after this incident, we moved to a new house. I never saw the flickering shadow demons again. I never had any more issues with being left alone in the house. As a skeptical adult looking back, I can say, look, I turned 12, I got over my fear of being home alone, and maybe I conjured the angel memory from nothing after that tooth incident. But that doesn't explain the tooth, and I remember the tooth. I could feel myself grasping for plausible scenarios. Maybe there's some medical test that requires an inner tooth test, so my parents took it. But then, why not just tell me? Why return the other half? It's the whole issue with this incident, as even if you accept the existence of angels, demons, ghosts, or the chupacabra, it doesn't really explain anything meaningful. So yeah, that's it. I don't think about it often, but when I do, it still bothers me. So at the end of all of this, I just hope someone or something is waiting for me, and they have with them half my tooth and some goddamn answers. Very, very nicely written. Awesome. Sleep paralysis tapped on bed and pulled my hair. Why are these things so weird? I've dealt with sleep paralysis for over 15 years now, on and off. At first they were terrifying, but they seem to happen less and less throughout the years. Lately I've been going through some hard times, and last night I fell asleep with my partner in our regular position. At the head of the bed, no TV on, which we usually fall asleep to Gordon Ramsay or Rick and Morty. I wake up to us sleeping on the foot of the bed almost as if watching a movie together, but he's on his back, arms behind his head, and I'm on my stomach with my arms crossed underneath supporting my head. What woke me was 2 taps on the bed near our heads. Immediately I knew this was sleep paralysis, and I think that plays a big part in being able to free up quicker. Tried to close my eyes, go back to sleep before giving it any more attention. When I did, something quickly jerked my hair bun upwards and fear came on. Tried to move, but could only wiggle my middle finger, which were near my partner's underarms. I tickled his underarm, and when he woke up, looked around. Suddenly I also awoke, and we were both back at the head of the bed like normal, except he was still sleeping, on his stomach facing away from me. Not at all in the position he was in my dream. So I tucked my leg under his and went back to sleep. Something I would have never been able to do after a case of sleep paralysis. So here are some of the things I've been thinking about. I've lately had a sort of second awakening to my spiritual side, and have used stones, black tourmaline, to meditate, and also to ground myself when I feel too spacey or emotional. I wonder if these things had brought me sort of a balanced but sleep paralysis in its proper place before the terror sets in. I didn't even really see a demon this time, so it helped, but I was immediately aware of the surroundings in the dream state, which is something that is usually elusive during sleep paralysis. What kind of worries me is that I've never been physically touched by whatever is watching me during sleep paralysis. I've been held down, but by an invisible force. Thankfully it was invisible, or I probably would have shit my pants many times throughout the years. This time it pulled my hair. Has anyone had any experience with sleep paralysis after starting a meditative journey or just going through a rough time? And how is it different from past experiences? Encounter I had on my apartment stairwell back in 2015. I stepped out of my apartment into the stairwell one night. To get a picture of it in your head, the stairs were red and metal, poorly painted and horribly maintained. The lights were bright white, constantly buzzed, and the walls were damp. I turned to go to the door, and that's when I saw him, a man wearing a navy blue overcoat that had very apparent wet spots on it, which was the first thing that threw me off since we hadn't had rain in weeks. The other thing that threw me off was how he smoked a cigarette. Smoke went in, but didn't come out. He held the cigarette in his mouth, gripping it as if it had fallen out of his mouth, and otherwise he sat on a step that went up to the main door. I watched him take a long drag. I watched him breathe out, and nothing. The crackling of the cigarette was so loud, like it had been amplified by 1,000. I looked closer at him and noticed his mouth was wide open. The crackle of the cigarette rung loud in the stairwell when I realized he wasn't holding up to his lips anymore. It was in his hand to his side. I walked down the stairs toward him, and as soon as I took a step, the air went dead silent. The rushing of the nearby river ceased, and the buzzing of the lights did too. I was fucking terrified, but I kept walking. I walked as fast as my feet could carry me, all the while praying he wasn't going to reach for a knife or anything. He didn't. He didn't reach for anything. For some reason, he allowed me to get uncomfortably close before he raised his arm up, held the cigarette to his mouth, and lit it. He was no longer moving and stood as still as a statue in the light of the white fluorescent bulbs above him. He didn't take a drag or even exhale and just sat there as if he were waiting for something. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I watched him sit there until his cigarette was almost completely smoked out. He was still and silent. I woke up back at my door, hand shaking and gripping the doorknob. I tried to shake it off as just a bad daydream because that's what it felt like. Too vivid to be a daydream, but too hazy to be real. About to open my door, and as I turned the handle, the air went dead silent again. Took my hand off the doorknob and the sound immediately came back. Never tried to open my door without listening for that dead silence now. It's up to you if you want to believe me or not. A lot of people look at me with a sort of pity when I tell them. They don't call me mad, but it's apparent that that's what they're thinking. Ask Reddit 1. In 4th grade, I found a book about holding seances in the occult in the elementary school library. Maybe not the best choice in books to have. Coming from a semi-conservative Christian household, of course, I was curious, and I checked it out, quickly hiding it deep in my backpack, and once I was home, taking it out of my room and stashing the book underneath my mattress. That night, I started reading a bit. I saw there was directions to summon someone who died in a mirror and you'd be able to talk to them. Well, the only person I knew who had passed was my great-grandfather. Maybe part of me knew nothing would really happen. Jesus wouldn't let anything bad get me, right? I took the book into the bathroom and started to follow the directions laid out. I honestly don't remember what they were, but I sure as hell, pun intended, remember what happened next. I remembered the mirror getting foggy, and then a face. It was my great-grandfather, but twisted, emaciated and gray and frightening. Every hair in my body stood on end as the image started to open its mouth, but before it said anything, I grabbed the book and bolted out of the bathroom, quickly slamming the door and going to hide in my bed. As an adult looking back, I can't help but doubt my own story. I was a child, I had an active imagination. Memories could be faulty. I do remember the absolute terror, the literal fear of God was put into me. But I don't know if it really was a demon, or my papa, or whatever else it could have been. You can't really summon the dead in your bathroom mirror, can you? Either way, that damn book went back to the library the next day. That was at a library? Ask Reddit 2. Happened to me and a small group of friends. When we were younger, we watched Battleships. Didn't really like the movie, but we enjoyed each other's company to just watch and have reasons to hang out. Halfway through the movie, a friend of mine sitting next to me was smiling a little too sheepishly while hugging her legs, which she brought into her chair. I was curious and mouthed and motioned. What? My friend and another friend who were in it and just kind of pointed in front. I looked in front and there's nothing significant going on in front of us. The theater wasn't packed, a lot of empty seats. The rows in front of us, probably half or a quarter of the rows in the entire hall, were all empty, except a couple that decided to sit in the row directly in front of mine. They were sitting a few seats away from my left and a row in front of me. I looked at them and there was nothing but funny going on. I looked back at my friend who was sitting on my right and motioning. Huh, what? In gestures. They kept pointing in the general vicinity in front of my friend. Failing to see anything, repeatedly my friend told me in a hushed voice, "The chair, look at the chair." I looked at the chair that was slightly haphazard in front of my friend. It was shaking as if somebody was either kicking the chair from behind rapidly, or if somebody sat in the chair and was rocking back and forth in it. I normally am a scaredy cat when it comes to paranormal stuff, but I had to know. So I lurched forward and looked down toward the row. I saw nothing. I just saw all the rows of chairs and saw nothing sitting in that chair. I saw no reason for the chair to behave that way. I did see a cartoon of popcorn, can't remember if it was placed on the chair, affected or beside it. I stared and saw nothing, just the chair shaking. All the adjacent chairs were not shaking and everything else was still as it should be. I laughed in disbelief. My friends asked me, did I see anything? I said nothing at all. Well, we just watched the movie to distract ourselves. We had an interesting post-movie chat too. Some additional occulty information. In Southeast Asian countries, people tend to be superstitious. It's normal for movie theaters to block entire front rows in theaters. Those who are superstitious would say they're reserved for visitors who also want to watch. The more skeptical would say it's to avoid needing to clean more rows when there's less customers. Ask Reddit 3. Oh my goodness, do I have something for this. I'm gonna cheat a bit. This was not my experience, but my dad's. And what he's experienced in his life regarding this is far more interesting than mine. So strap yourselves in, because it's gonna be a long one, and let me tell you about his old farmhouse, otherwise known as the Spooky House. Now for context, my dad grew up on a dairy farm with his parents, who worked for a guy who owned multiple farms. So they would hop around to different farms and manage them, so to speak. Also, we live in Australia. Anyway, while my dad was in his late teens to early 20s, they lived in this house that eventually became known as the Spooky House to him and his parents. And this is what they experienced while living there. The house was known to have a very foreboding feeling to it, like something was always off and you couldn't put your finger on it. The floor was made out of old wood that had little notches in it. Put little stoppers in them to fill the holes. A lot of the time, they would wake up in the morning and find that all of the stoppers were pushed up. And that was from underneath the house. Dad said they had these giant-ass hippie beads hanging in the doorway, so big and heavy that it would have to be a big gust of wind to move them. He lost count how many times he would get up early for work and such and find them swaying. Like somebody walked through them, but when he checked the bedrooms, everyone was asleep. I remember Dad telling me it was slowly getting worse over time, like the house didn't want them there or something. At one point, Nan contacted a psychic to see if they could make it better or calm it down. Well, the psychic wouldn't even get out of her car and come up the driveway. Absolutely refused to come inside the house. Nan was left flabbergasted and asked what she could do. The psychic told her to move house and drove off. Dad said not long after that these things would start stalking the house. And to this day he has no idea what they were, and he doesn't really want to know. Nan would come out in the morning, find the grass was pressed down or trampled around the house, especially where the windows are. Her peg basket on the clothesline would be ripped to shreds and bits of it spread about. Dad said she would get the shits because she had to keep buying new ones. It started to get more serious when Dad would wake up by scratching at his window on the outside. He was always too scared to look back at it because he knew whatever it was staring right back at him while scratching the window. They would check in the morning to find that the paint had been scratched off the house at around human height and grass flattened. At one point, while his dad was out working a few paddocks over, Nan came in and woke Dad up, and together they huddled in his bedroom, waiting for daylight as the thing stalked around the outside of the house. Speaking of it, it stalked Dad once too. He was walking from the house to his dad, a few paddocks over to help with the cows, about 4 a.m.-ish. It was cold and there was frost on the glass. As Dad was walking, he could hear a crunch, crunch coming from behind him. So he stopped, and it stopped too. Dad was like, huh, started walking again, and so did it. Again, Dad stopped. It stopped. Now, starting to get freaked out, Dad started to pick up the pace and stopped again. Only this time, it didn't stop, but started to come right at Dad. Dad fucking bolted, ran over 2 paddocks and cleared the fences. Didn't stop till he reached his dad's side. Whenever Dad's parents left for a couple of days, he had the place to himself. Dad would host massive parties with his friends. They had the run of the house and could sleep wherever they wanted. But all of them always ended up huddling up in one room where they would want to sleep. One time, it was just Dad and his cousin over. Played a game of pool and drank, and at one point around midnight, the both of them were sitting around and heavily drank. A dark figure appeared and said, "Go to bed." Dad said he was pissed drunk and thought, "Hey, why the hell not?" and then went to bed. The next morning, they woke up to find a game of pool that was left unfinished, put away, and his cousin asked, "Who was that person that was standing over the beds watching them sleeping?" Dad didn't remember that part. Anyway, there's more to that house than I can tell, but it's going to be a very long post, so sorry about that. I will say that, well, Dad and his parents moved out and somebody else eventually moved in. Not long after that, the house burned down. Dad didn't know what caused the fire, but he was sure as fuck happy about it. Ask Reddit 4. My cousin went to college at SCAD in Savannah. At the end of her first year, my aunt and I went to help pack her up, move stuff into storage for the next year. Both of them went to grab lunch, and since I wasn't hungry, I stayed behind to keep working. We were asked to deconstruct the beds if they'd been bunked, and I'd put the pins from that on a dresser to take to the RA later, and I went back to cleaning the bathroom area, heard a loud ping behind me. One of the pins had rolled off the dresser. Okay, no problem. Picked it up, put it in, went back to the sink. I heard a ping again. One had fallen again, and annoyed at myself, I picked it back up and put it with the other. I moved them vertically so they couldn't really roll off again, and I turned around and took one step toward the sink and ping. Suddenly I got a really cold, nauseated feeling. I felt like I was being watched. Shook it off, went to pick up the pin, and again I grabbed it and the other pin, put them in an empty cup on the dresser. I barely turned around when I heard the ping and a giggle. I was just standing there, absolutely frozen to the spot when my aunt and cousin walked in with their lunch. Both of them looked at me, and my aunt said, "What's wrong, hon? You're white as a sheet." My cousin goes, "Ugh, was it the ghosts?" I said, "What fucking ghosts?" Apparently, it's well known that the dorm's haunted as fuck. I guess my cousin's roommate moved out because the ghost was freaking her out. She'd gotten a preacher in to bless the room and expel the ghost, and my cousin said it was just making the ghost mad. I guess the girl's stuff went missing all the time. They'd come home from class just to get the girl's stuff, and it'd be pulled out of the dressers and emptied onto the floor. Anyway, that was 2006. I wouldn't have gone if I'd known all that, and honestly, I'm still a little annoyed at my aunt and cousin for putting me in that situation. Paranormal happenings at my family home. I believe that for a number of years, my family home, built in the 1960s by my grandparents from my father's side, has been haunted by several different paranormal entities over the course of decades, just because of major differences between the happenings themselves. It's a 2-story house, with my parents and I sleeping on the second floor, and my sister and grandparents sleeping on the first. For me, however, this began around 15 years ago. My older sister was the first one afflicted. In a short span of time, she began having constant sleep paralysis experiences, which I know aren't scientifically related to anything paranormal, but the folklore of my country relates them to a specific entity. An entity known as a dark man, for lack of better translation to English. What you might call a sleep paralysis demon. Often thought of it as a mischievous and perhaps even evil spirit behind this. At first, nothing was thought of it, but these became so frequent it was starting to weird my parents out as well as myself and my sister. Soon, more things started happening in addition to this, like her waking up in the middle of the night with something invisible pulling on her long hair, causing her to freak out and calling out for my grandma, who, with lightning speed, ran over with a bottle of holy water, sprayed the place, and prayed with my sister. Another time this happened, whatever was playing with her hair appeared to blow air into her face, freaking her out even more. Grandma strikes again after this, of course. The most shocking thing during the beginning of these happenings came when my mother, my sister, and I were all in our living room watching TV, when suddenly, from a fully awake state, my sister shifted into a state of sleep paralysis. It took a couple of seconds for my mom and me to realize what was happening, when we noticed her shaking with her eyes open on the sofa, struggling to let out a sound. That's when, she finally woke up. She let out a blood-curdling scream, crying and yelling at my mom and myself. "It got me, it got me! Why didn't you help me?" She was visibly shook and pale. My grandma arrived, of course, with her usual remedy. And even my father, a skeptic, walked out of my parents' bedroom, freaked out by her screams. My grandma remembered that in local lore, if a person wants to be protected from the dark man, a piece of clothing from the person's father needs to be placed onto them, serving as a shield. So we tied my father's belt around her waist. She went to sleep in my room, as she usually did when things like this happened. Still distraught and frightened, she asked me to go get her a glass of water. So I went to get some in a plastic cup from the water dispenser and give it to her. As my mom was still in the living room and my bedroom door, as well as my parents' bedroom, were open, we all witnessed this next part. As I approached my bedroom door, the plastic cup practically exploded in my hand, splitting on all sides, water bursting out of my hand. My mom got up immediately, came over, and everybody looking in shock. Absolutely speechless. My dad first thought that I dropped the cup, and if I remember correctly, but upon closer inspection, the cup was torn all around in perfectly straight lines, almost as if somebody cut it with a scalpel. Safe to say, not much sleep had been having that night, and since that night, my mother and I began experiencing sleep paralysis. A couple of times, not for me, but until this very day also, nightly noises started appearing in her house. Different than the house, settling, moving chairs, clanking dishware, mainly on the second floor, and especially when we weren't home. At one point, my grandma even searched the second floor suspecting a burglary as she heard an old wardrobe in my parents' room open in addition to moving chairs. But when she reached the room, the wardrobe was open, but nobody was there. These incidents prompted my sister to visit our local priest. After explaining the situation, the happenings, and the nature of the haunting, the priest concluded that a lost spirit inhabited our home, and was for some reason reaching out to my sister, wanting to become known. My sister was a little relieved after this, knowing that the spirit meant no harm. She even named the spirit Samuel. Well, now it was time to figure out what and who the hell Samuel actually was. There were a couple of theories. The first one concerned when my grandma was a little girl on her way home from school. She had to pass through a cemetery every day, and one day she saw pretty flowers on a grave. She picked them and brought them home without telling anyone. That very night, she woke up to an invisible force grabbing her by the leg, trying to drag her out of bed. She felt as if she knew that whatever was dragging her wanted those flowers back. She woke her parents up, and her mother said the same thing. They threw or returned the flowers the next morning. And from that day on, she knew not to take anything from a graveyard ever again. It could have been that this entity remained attached to her and moved with her from her childhood home to our house when her and Grandpa built it, since it was only a couple of houses next door. The second one was that the ghost was possibly my grandma's father, my great-grandpa, who I hadn't ever met. This was thought because before he died, he said to my grandma, "If I'm gone and you ever hear something moving in the attic, know that it's me." Coincidentally, the attic eventually became the second floor of the house, where most of the noises in the cup incident did happen. It's also worth noting that my sister and I shared my room before she moved downstairs, so it could be connected somehow. I truly don't know. Other incidents soon followed. My mother once felt a strong press in her upper body when she was nearly sleeping, and thinking Dad put his arm around her with his full weight, she asked him to move the arm. After she got no response, she asked again, complaining that it was hard to breathe. She eventually had enough to point of crying and yelled at him to stop, only to realize he wasn't even turned toward her in bed. He was turned to the other side and woke up wondering why she was screaming. She still remembers this vividly, and it frightens her to this day. I remember one night I was playing a PS2 game very late. I had gone to bed without realizing I forgot to turn it off. My LED light-up joystick remained plugged in. I woke up in the middle of the night and the TV was off, but thank God the PS2 was still working and the joystick was glowing. I couldn't stand the darkness with all that shit going on. I remember looking at the PS2 and the light, when suddenly the goddamn joystick unplugs itself, and in an instant, total darkness and panic in the room. I wake up, run to the light switch, which remained turned on the entire night. This was soon followed by my dumb ass, once again late at night watching TV in the living room. The stairs are connected to our second floor at the very beginning of the living room and are separated by a thin metal strip from the living room floor. In total darkness, I hear footsteps coming up the stairs. I yell out to my sister, believing she's going upstairs for a drink. As I get no response, I realize that there isn't a chance in hell that my sister would be coming up the stairs without turning the light on, as she never sleeps with the light off since this shit started happening. To this very day, she's almost 30 years old. I sit up at the sofa, frozen, listening to each footstep as it comes closer to the top of the stairs. Finally, I hear the metal strip at the top of the stairs clanking as if somebody stepped on it. I run for the hills, or should I say, for my parents' bedroom door, frantically banging on it and screaming for them to let me in. I slept in their room for the rest of the night. The most bizarre thing during that first round of hauntings happened during broad daylight, and it is truly unexplainable in every way. My grandpa, grandma, sister, and I were all heading next door to my aunt's house that afternoon. My grandparents went before us, and I was still doing something in my room and my sister's in the bedroom. I was always just practicing at our home as our last person to leave takes on the key from the inside of the... Try that again. It was always practice at our home that the last person to leave takes the key from the inside of the front door and locks it up before heading out. So I run out of the house, telling my sister that I'm going. She replies that she won't be far behind. I close the door behind me, and my sister tries to come out of the house maybe half a minute after me. She reaches for the door handle and realizes that the house is locked. The goddamn house was locked from the inside. After I left and she remained the only person in there, meaning nobody was there to lock it, she unlocked it as fast as she could and ran out after telling me that something locked her inside. We told everybody. We checked the locks, tried to reproduce this, but it was impossible. The key had to be turned 6 times for the door to be locked. This was the last major thing from that first round, I believe. It was followed by mostly noises, which we learned to live with and accept. My sister accepted this Samuel. Truly no more incidents happened for a long time. At first, we didn't spread a word of this outside family and family friends, but when some time passed, I told my classmates about this, and one of them actually stayed the night after my birthday as he was intrigued by the noises and wanted to hear it for himself. My sister knew this and actually tried to pull a prank on us by knocking at our door late at night after the party. He and my other friend, who was also sleeping over, got scared shitless, so my sister kind of just revealed herself. By the next time it happened, a couple of hours later, my friend woke up to say something that was knocking out there again. I opened the door, but this time nobody was out there. My sister was in her room fast asleep. He kept asking me what the hell was that. I just couldn't give him an answer. I was too scared to. But I was used to it. He never slept over again and tells me the story a lot, as well as others who've slept there. But it's... It's 6. I'm a very down-to-earth person, still convinced there must be some rational explanation. But the following happened to me. There was a small guest room in my parents' house that I never could sleep in. Every time I tried, I had restless nights where I woke up frequently to the sound of somebody calling my name or whispering something unintelligible. I always blamed the busy wallpaper coupled with the size of the room, which was tiny, causing me to be unable to rest my mind and thus experience these dreams. The most unpleasant dreams were those when somebody opened the door to the room and would just stand in the door opening. The weird thing about those dreams was that the door always opened inwards, where in reality the door opened outwards, thus reaffirming that it must be a dream. Years passed, and my parents decided to move and asked me and a friend to help with the move. We stayed in the small guest room, and my friend had to sleep on a mattress on the floor. Even though it had been many years that I actually slept in the room, I was anxious to do so. The realization that it would be the last time, combined with the fact that my friend was sleeping there as well, eased my mind somewhat. I fell asleep quite soundly. When I awoke the next day, I was refreshed and ready for the move. My friend, however, looked like he hadn't slept at all. When I asked him what was wrong, he told me that he had been awoken by someone trying to open the door throughout the night, but being unable to do so, basically due to his mattress blocking the doorway. Thought it might have been my father, but was afraid to ask. I reassured him it was all just a dream since the door only opened outward, not inwards. That was all I ever said of the matter. The move went well, and I'm glad to never see that house or that room ever again. Ask Reddit 7. During the fall and winter months when I was 17, I moved into a windowless room in my parents' basement. It was the end of my junior year, and I was stressed over my schoolwork, work, and everything else going on at the time, so sleep was tough to find. Every night about 2 or 3 in the morning, I would hear noise coming from my closet. The door was closed, but when I opened it, my clothes on the hangers would be swaying slightly. The closet had a single light on the ceiling, so it could cast shadows downward, and I looked through the clothes by pulling them apart, but nothing. This would happen every few days. It was driving me mad. Talked to my friends, and they went into great detail about how it was a ghost, and all the things I could do to catch evidence of it. I posted a motion-sensing camera a friend lent me, faced it looking into the closet, and a few days later it happened again, but the camera recorded nothing. I was giving up hope. Soon I took everything out of the closet and got some of the best sleep I've had in months. Once rested and getting tired of my parents asking me to clean my room because it was a bunch of closet clutter, I put it all back. That night it happened again. I searched the house for the most powerful flashlight I could find, set an alarm for 2 a.m. to catch whatever it was in the act. 2 a.m. I wake and wait. While waiting, I heard a noise. The hangers were moving and boxes had fallen. I turn in the flag light and rush over to the closet expecting anything. I search the closet and I begin to feel hopeless. Some ghost is going to do this to me every free night. There's nothing I can do. I sit in the ground a little scared, not wanting to be in the dark, but I don't want to keep dealing with this. So I waited in front of that closet for half an hour waiting. It's about 4 a.m. when my flashlight starts to fade, and when I look up, I see 2 glowing eyes looking down on me. My heart almost stopped, and then I realized what it was. It was my neighbor's black cat looking at me from between the hangers. All this time, she's been climbing into my closet and lying across the coat hangers. She didn't move at all when I pulled the hangers apart, and that black, long and thin thing, so I couldn't see her unless I was looking for her. She didn't make another sound. But my biggest question was, how the hell did she get in the house and into my room? I watched her leave, and she entered a hole in the ceiling in the basement's unfinished bathroom. I listened to her travel from one side of the house to the other. She was getting through the garage. I later found out that she was going into the crawl space under the garage. That was in through the hole in the wall behind some equipment, up a ladder and into the attic and into the walls. Somehow getting up and down between the house and garage into the basement through the hole and opened the door while I slept. I moved the ladder and the haunting stopped. Sorry if this wasn't a real paranormal story, but it's the closest I got to believing it was possible. Have a good night, guys. See ya.